Hi everybody, welcome to Granny Tales. I'm pretty sure somebody on YouTube already has that name, but that's what this is today. I kind of wanted to talk to you about what it was like for one of the late boomers to grow up along with Gen X, the early Gen Xers, not the later ones, the early Gen Xers. Because it was actually such an interesting time, and they really don't teach much about it in school. Now, I was born in the mid-60s, and lower mid-60s, 64. In Chicago. I was born in the ghetto, which is not the ghetto anymore. Where I was born, we lived on a street called Erie Street, and sometimes on Huron. But we would move back and forth to whichever apartments were the most affordable at the time, because it was a very poor area. And it was so poor. Our sidewalks were like this. And there were vacant, tore down buildings, or buildings that had burned. The rubble still left right where it fell. When I was a kid, we played in that. We climbed around and looked for what we called treasures, because sometimes we'd find somebody's pictures or a piece of a plate or whatever, just whatever garbage was left there when the place collapsed or burned down. But there was this bar that sat beneath my Aunt Shirley's apartment, and she had a 3-bedroom apartment. It was long. The bedrooms were very small. She had all of her 9 kids. I think she had 9. Yeah, I think so. My sister and I ended up living there for a little bit with my aunt, my mom, after my parents separated. But me and my cousin Georgiana, she was the youngest of my aunt's kids, we hung around together. Even though I was the oldest of my moms and she was the youngest of my aunts, we had a stronger connection than we had with the others. And we played Barbie dolls, sitting out on the stoop is what we called it back in the day, the stoop. We would sit out there and play with her Barbie dolls because I didn't have any. And her mom would hand sew gorgeous clothes for these dolls off of just a little piece of fabric somebody gave her. But when it would get really hot and we couldn't play on the stoop anymore, or the bar was getting real busy, so they wanted us out of the way, we had another place that we went to play. And it was under the sidewalk because it had buckled up near the bar. Can't even think of the name of the bar. Otis, no, that was our school. I can't remember the name of the bar, but it sat right on the corner, just down the street from what we called Erie House. And the sidewalk was just as bad along there as it was in front of my aunt's apartment building. But me and my cousin would take our Barbies and we'd go under there and we would play, and people would walk over us and we could hear conversations from people, and then we would pretend our dolls were having those conversations. Just normal, silly child's play. And if it was real hot, we would listen when we'd be down there waiting and playing, and We could have gone upstairs, but the apartment was upstairs and heat rises. So it lets you know that even with all the windows that were in that apartment, it was just a heat death trap. We're talking 1968, around in there. Yeah, because I would have been 5 years old. And we would play under there, but while we were playing, we would listen, because you would know as soon as they turned on the fire hydrant. And as soon as the city would come and open up that fire hydrant, because we didn't have garden hoses to go drink out of. That was suburbia. Suburban kids had that. And so we were city kids. We didn't have that. But we did have fire hydrants. And when they would first open it up, they wouldn't let anybody near it because the water pressure was so strong, it could break bones. But after a few minutes, you could start get closer. And you would see parents coming out of the apartment buildings and getting cups of water and just dumping it over themselves and getting in the water as much as the kids were. And we drank from that too. You sit your mouth open, catching as much water as you could get. We had Chicago City water, and back then it was not the best tasting water you could drink. But then after they would come, when the sun was beginning to go down, and turn those fire hydrants off, and everybody would go sit out on their stoops in the cool evening air, me and my cousin would go back under the sidewalk, because it was like a little mini pool of muddy dirty water that had gathered there under the sidewalk. And we would use that to make pies and pretend we were making cakes and try to feed them to the guys coming out of the bar. And some of them would actually, okay, kid, here, give me that. And poke a mouthful of Chicago mud dirt. Fire hydrant water. And they, of course, spit it out, It wasn't like, well, actually one didn't one time. He was so drunk, he just drank it down and said, thank you, kids, and went on his way. But we went to Otis School, and it was called Otis School. It was not elementary. In that school was kindergarten all the way to grade 12, all in one tall, big school. I mean, these kids came in from all over the Chicagoland area that was near our school, and our school was cram-packed, and it was dangerous. It was more the other kids that were dangerous, because we were inner city kids, so you had to deal with the gangs. And in Erie House location, Otis School, there was always, Latin Kings, and, I'm trying to think, there was Latin Kings. I'm sure some of my generation and some Gen X generation can probably tell you the rest of those names. That's the one that sticks with me the most. And I'm not sure if they were Puerto Rican or Cuban at the time. Our neighborhood at the time was mostly Puerto Rican. And they spoke, I guess, what you would call American Spanish, because it was a blend of the two languages from Puerto Rico and the U.S. And I could hardly speak it now, but I did speak it really really well as a kid because that's the only way I could talk to most of my friends, most people I went to school with. Even our teachers spoke it. Our classrooms were enormous. They had to be, because each classroom was basically 2 grades for one teacher. So today's teachers, with all their complaining about how bad they got it, you should have been a teacher in Chicago at the time. It was a nightmare. If you were in the bottom tier of the school, you had kindergarten and first grade. And these kids are just, they want to go home. They don't want to mess around with all this stuff. They want to go home and sit in the house or play outside, do anything but be in school. And the first graders are pretty close the same way, but they're starting to like some of what we're learning, so they're trying. But it was kind of a losing battle. And if you were in second and third grade, the teacher had to go back and forth between these levels and try to keep up with the teaching at the same time. So this was, in my eyes, the most amazing inner city school teachers I've ever heard of, because Otis was so massive, and there was probably, I'm going to say, 1,000 kids, maybe more, in that one school. And, you know, if you were a younger kid, you really had to steer clear of the older ones. What they would still call boomers today, a little bit older than me. They were mean. They were not kindly kids. They had to fight a lot for everything. And so if you got in their path, you could be their victim. But most of us knew how to stay out of that. And did. I did. I never had a problem really with it, but I did see other kids have it. Right across the street from us, it was Pete's General Store. And this store was really pretty small. It had some basic goods, you know, breads and lunch meat a little bit from the deli area. But we would go there in the morning before we would go to school and buy our lunch. Me and my cousins would split what money we had so that we could get the big sandwiches and split it in half. And that would be our lunch for that day. Because back then, school lunches, there was none. You brought your own. And the sandwiches were named after his wife, Millie. And it was the most delicious sandwiches. All kinds of different kinds of lunch meat, like provolone cheese. The first time I ever tasted was there. And the first time I ever saw anybody put oil on their bread with a little bit of Italian seasonings, and then they would put some salamis and some bologna, and ham was, sometimes you could get it, sometimes you couldn't. And then they'd load it up with yellow cheese and a little bit of provolone. And oh my goodness, it was so good. And when you were eating this sandwich, you know, you're a little kid. So this sandwich, even though it was half of a sandwich, it felt massive in your hands. And the flavor was just, oh wow. I mean, Wow, how I would love to go back to the day and go to Pete's store and get a Millie sandwich. That would be the most incredible thing to do. But that place is long since closed. And yeah, long time retired. Well, that's my granny tales for now. My video is getting kind of long, so I gotta speed it up a little bit so it'll upload easier and not be such a big video. Sorry when I have to do that, but I enjoyed telling you guys things, and it's hard to tell you anything in detail in a minute or 3 minutes. So, alright guys, I love you. Take care. Angel out.